You're not sharing anything, are you yet?
No. I was going to share once Katie kicked it off.
I just wanted to make sure. I'm like, am I only seeing the gallery, but I should be seeing the slides?
Hello, welcome. Hello, Andrea and Edwin. Welcome to the Newberry party.
Nikki.
Nikki, welcome. Who's excited to talk tech and systems today? I know Jeff is.
Yeah, he raised his hand. Welcome, Carlos. And the famous
Emac in the house.
Aaron in the house. Andrea.
Kick it off in 1 minute.
Beautiful.
Give a chance for a few others to join. Jen, welcome.
Yes, welcome, Jen. Oh, are you feeling the Christmas spirit, Jeff? I see you have a Christmas cup in hand, or a festive cup.
Yes.
You and Costco, starting early.
Starbucks, they give these away. It's like the second week of December or something. And my daughter, over the last couple of years, has been a hoarder. And speaking of, I mean, not to get ahead of ourselves, because we will have a hoarder piece today. Cups, though, she goes to every Starbucks, like within a 3 or 4 mile radius from where we live, and gets them. So we have a stack of these things.
Nice. When I put on my red shirt today, I was like, I feel a little like Christmassy.
Oh. I might have to change my background.
Frost this morning, it was 37, so.
It's chilly here too.
Welcome, Brendan, Molly. All right, it's 11 o'clock, so I'm going to kick it off, hand it over to Amy so she can get this party started.
Thank you, Katie. Hello, everybody. Happy fall, y'all, as we say in the South. I am Amy Yakowski, and I'm so thrilled to have you join us for part 2 of our 4-part series, all about how to create a change-ready organization. So that way you set yourself, your teams, your leaders, and your implementation partners up for success. So the way we started all of this was back in the summer. We had a webinar with Joe and Sean Beatty to talk just about this idea of change readiness and what it means and what are the things that really impact your ability to be successful. And we identified through that 4 key pillars of change success. There's what we talked about last month, which is clearly defined strategy, having a compass, having a North Star, having a point that you're aiming towards, having clean and aligned systems as part of that strategy, having well-documented processes, both current and future state, and then most importantly, having empowered, change-ready people to navigate through this journey of transformation that you are embarking on together. So last month, we talked and focused on strategy, and we talked about what strategy is. We also touched on what strategy isn't, too, and why strategy is so important when you're embarking on any type of change. It's something that often we miss or we put to the side in lieu of time or urgency and wanting to move forward. But as we noted last time, it is so critical to making sure that everybody is not just on the right boat, but sitting in the right seats and rowing in the right direction, not rowing in opposite directions. Some of the things we identified when it came to strategy is we first and foremost said strategy is not the how things are done. It's more focused on the why, the what, the where, and the who. It's also really important that you not just set a North Star, but you continue to calibrate your compass to make sure that you're moving in the right direction along the way, knowing that you're going to occasionally encounter some obstacles or detours that you might have to take along your journey. We also talked about this idea of strategy, and to quote the incomparable Tim Jackson, It's not complicated. It's just freaking hard. And what he means by that is it's freaking hard to take the time. I think we were even just talking about it at the top of the call, right? Right before we started the webinar, how we sometimes get in just this do, act, execute mode. And we don't always take the time for strategy. And then when we look back, we wonder maybe why things aren't quite going as well or in the right direction where we wanted them to go. So it's really important to take the time to do it, or most likely you're going to have some struggles later. And then lastly, we talked about the idea that when it comes to strategy as part of any strategic plan that you're putting together, to also make sure that you're incorporating resource planning and engagement, making sure that you're taking into account what's happening in your business, in your industry, with your resources, so that way they are not getting burned out and they're more willing to lean in and step up to this change that you're embarking on. Now, your strategy often requires or is to a certain extent predicated on a need for optimized systems and technology. And that is what we are here to dig into today. So I'm Amy Akowski. I am super psyched to be here. I am the CEO, founder, actually, I should say the Chief Evolution Officer. That's my spin on CEO. I'm the Change Evolution Officer, navigator, and founder of Painted Porch Strategies. And I am so happy to be here with my compatriot, Jeff Ozenbaugh. Jeff is a front office configuration specialist, and now he heads up the customer success team at Newberry Partners. He is here with his tiny desk. I don't know if we're going to have any tambourine come out at some point, as well as his partner in crime, Murray, who may make an appearance. We don't know. We'll see what happens. But Jeff, welcome. So glad to have you.
Thank you, Amy. Glad to be here, and thanks for joining, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, all of this wouldn't happen without our amazing marketing director, Katie Cridler. She makes all of this happen, ensures that webinars are scheduled, marketing pages are up. Without her, none of you would be here, and we wouldn't be here either. But we would just be talking to no one.
Thanks,
So,
Amy.
thank you, Katie. So today's topics, like I said, we're really focusing on the technology and the systems that really come into play when it comes to any type of change transformation that you're embarking on. We're going to talk about, first and foremost, knowing your tech why and why it's important to have your why. Then we're going to talk about how you can understand your tech now and why that's really important and critical to help inform your future decisions that you make about your technology and your systems. And then what's most important is how you can prep for what's next when it comes to the technology and system initiatives that you might be embarking on. So usually, I think, Jeff, and correct me if I'm wrong, often what happens when organizations come to you, they say something like this, right? We're a mess. We need some help. Please, can you help us? Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope, right? They come to you to try to help create some sort of semblance of what is and help them design what's next. So first and foremost, the most important thing when it comes to embarking on any type of technology change is really understanding your tech why. So the first thing that we wanted to do as part of the chat, if you all have the chat, we would love to have you share, why are you exploring a new technology adoption or optimization? Or maybe if you're not in the midst of one right now, maybe you have one coming up or you just went through one. Share some of the reasons why you're exploring some sort of new technology change. And we'll give a minute with the chat here, because I know I put you on the spot. Jeff, from your perspective, what are some of the things that you typically hear as part of, as say, the why someone is pursuing some technology change or adoption or optimization?
Well, it's an interesting question because a lot of times they don't really know the why, right? They just know that they're not having success in whatever capacity that they're looking for success. So they're wondering why they don't have success. And that's really where the tech why comes into play, right? You start looking at what are your technology pieces? Why did you purchase them in the first place? And are they still relevant? You can begin to start at the 5 whys or the 6 whys and really just digging deep. So there are various reasons why they'll come to us. Generally, it's because whatever methodology that they've been applying is now failing, right? So that's where they pump the brakes basically and say, hey, we don't know what we're doing, and we're looking for some assistance on your end and some insight and some consultation of how did we get here, right?
Yeah. It looks like Linda said too many disparate systems not talking to each other. That is absolutely something I'm sure that you see on the regular that can happen, especially with the, proliferation of tech that's out there. Sometimes in to Anna's point, like wanting to stay on the front end of industry advancements, in that desire, you keep buying things. I know personally, as an entrepreneur and as a business owner, I have a graveyard of technologies that I've purchased. AppSumo has made a lot of money off of me just buying things to try and see if they work. And many of them have just, they sit in my technology graveyard at this point. So when we think about this idea of your tech why, there's some important points that we want to call out when you think about your tech why, right? And Jeff, can you share a little bit about some of these that what's important when you start a conversation with a client? Like, what's the type of discussion that you're having before you even get into the what of what they need or what they want? Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you touch on?
Sure. So I think it's really important to get a concrete understanding of each one of the different tools that a person has within their portfolio of SaaS tools or what have you, and looking at each one of those individually after you have them all kind of itemized, right? And having a complete laundry list of all these different tech tools that you're using, and then to look at each one and scrutinize each piece to say, what did that solve for, or what is that solving for? And then that will start giving us answers to whether it's relevant, irrelevant, is it something that needs to be replaced, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think so often because we can get pulled into, what often is called like shiny feature syndrome, right? Squirrel. Sometimes we end up buying things without maybe a clear strategic idea of how we're going to use them in our organization, or we buy technology that sometimes can like actually counter what we've said our strategic goals or even the values of the organization are. Sometimes they are in conflict with one another. So I think to your point, it's really important to make sure that before you start buying and scooping up and bolting on new things, right? I think Anna or Linda, to your point, having too many disparate systems, before you start bolting that on, making sure that you first understand where are we going. So that way, when we step into and start looking at and thinking about or evaluating our current technology and future options, do those align? Are they taking us closer to the North Star, that endpoint that we're trying to get to, or is it maybe pulling us off course? I think it's really important. And also, when you think about it, you had called out Jeff before, and I put it on the slide here, like why is this technology necessary? Is it because it's to solve some sort of, say, short-term pain or maybe a feature gap within your tech stack? Or is this tied to some sort of long-term strategy? I think it's really important to call that out, to have clarity of eyes and purpose when you are going on that path, because if not, you might continue to keep using something, right, that maybe isn't necessarily of value anymore. Or like we talked about, Jeff, there might be things that you're overlooking or maybe even like overcomplicating the tools that you really need to help support your goals.
Yeah, or are you even familiar with the components of your tech stack, right? You may or may not know what you have.
Yeah. And so now I'm going to move forward because this picture, I think, is a good representation of some tech stacks that maybe you have seen in your career, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone's familiar or should be familiar with the classic Rube Goldberg simple machines illustrations, right? So it's a good example of where you could be in a pinch with what's going on in your operation, right? Like a simple operation of wiping your face has now become, excuse me, all these different components, right? With a lot of chaos going on for just one simple thing. to be accomplished. You may or may not need all those pieces. I would keep the bird. I kind of like the bird in there. I don't know. He's
Yeah. I mean,
uh,
anytime you can introduce a parrot into your systems, I think is a great idea. Yeah.
yeah, parrot with a hat. It looks like he's wearing a hat. I think, I don't know. I can't resist that. Point is that, you don't necessarily know what is in your tech stack until you start examining these things. Maybe you need them still, maybe you don't, but you won't have the answer until you take a look at each one of those individual pieces. And then also take a step back to look at, going back to the previous webinar, your strategy for success, right? So what is that strategy? What does success look like to you? What does your strategy align with that vision? Or how does that align with your vision? And then, all right, now what's our toolbox look like, right? And so do I
Mm-hmm.
automate some of this stuff, or maybe there are things that do the tool better? Maybe some of the tools, maybe the parrot does what D and C and B does do, right? Without knowing this or scrutinizing it with a real microscopic lens, you're not going to necessarily know until you do the due diligence, right?
Yeah. So first and foremost, make sure that you've taken time to have a strategy and then overlay your technology with that strategy. So that way you have a clear purpose of whatever solution or solutions or systems you're deciding to integrate. Also, knowing whether or not it's a short-term fix or a long-term goal. And also thinking about through this effort, are we overstuffing? Are we overcomplicating maybe a task that doesn't need to be solved, or a part of your process that maybe doesn't need to be solved through technology? There are some instances where introducing technology can and sometimes slow you down. So it's important to go into that with clear eyes. And you're exactly right. It kind of starts with starting with that inventory, right? That inventory and knowing your tech now and what maybe are the contributors or the solutions to the problems that you are trying to solve that you already have in your tech stack today, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's the mess, as it says here? Create an inventory, look at and analyze each one of the components. The Rocket Money app. I don't know if anyone on this call is familiar with that, but I downloaded that a little while ago, and I think it's a fantastic application. It basically scrutinizes all the different apps that you purchase, and I have so many that I have not been able to keep track of that. And there were at least a half a dozen that I've been paying for that I haven't been using in quite some time, and it saved me a lot of money. So I think that there isn't a Rocket app or Rocket Money app for technology, as far as I know. Maybe that'll be my
Well,
first million.
I mean, you're kind of the you're kind of the Rocket Money app for staffing systems and technology, right? Because
Yes,
that's a
I'm
lot
the
of what you
human
do. Yeah.
Rocket Money app. Exactly.
Human Rocket Money app. If only we can clone Jeff and turn him into an app. We'll see. We'll put that on the roadmap.
Yeah, I'll have to work with some of our internal engineers on and developing that and tap into my mind. Um, but point is, like this little image here, it's kind of overwhelming, right? It's sort of anxiety inducing. Like, where do all these inputs and outputs, where are they going, right? So let's take a look at each one piece by piece. And what's number one, let's see what they're solving for. Maybe the app was purchased for someone on the team because they had a need for it maybe 2 years ago. And now that person might not even be with the company any longer, or there is an existing piece of software that you're using that already inherently has that functionality, but it's being overlooked because simply just adoption or adaption, and people aren't learning how to use the tool. So it's the why again. It's kind of redundant and maybe cliche, the 5 whys, or as Amy likes to say, the 7 whys or 8 whys.
Evan.
Right. Can you really ask that question enough times, right? It's just the constant scrutiny of like dig, why, and then what's the why to that answer, right? To see, maybe this tech stack needs to be completely dismantled and repaired or replaced, or maybe not again. But without looking at those things with a real scrutiny or real vigilance, then you're not going to know the answer to those things. So was the tool a workaround? I don't know, maybe yes, so maybe not. Can we replace it with something else? Or I think something that gets lost in this conversation of the technology, the shiny, yeah, squirrel. AI is such a huge, you know, everyone wants AI right now. It's a huge topic right
It's
now.
so hot right now. AI is so hot right now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's been the, it's the flavor of the year, right? Or whatever you want to call it. And sure, it's fantastic technology and you can apply it in so many different ways. But in my humble opinion, I think that the people behind the tools are really, that's where you're going to have success. So do the people who are using these tools even know how to use them? And it's something I come across day in and day out when I'm trying to solve for X for our client groups, is that the tools don't work because people just don't necessarily know how to use them. So you want to examine whether the functionality, again, it might be just something that is uh, intrinsically part of the way the functionality is supposed to be operating, but people just don't know that. And so maybe it's time to pause and not only learn the tech stack, but who is using the tech stack and how do we get them to a better place where they can use this and get the ideal or the optimum amount of output from the different tools that you're using.
Yeah, I think that's such an excellent point. And Tim actually mentioned something similar to that in the chat when we were asking the why. He said, because my current vendor is terrible, someone has to be better. And while each vendor, each technology has its things that it shines and things that it struggles with, and this is probably slightly biased because I used to help design some of those features. But there's a reason behind. There was a legitimate use case and user story behind some of those pieces that were developed, or maybe some pieces that were not. And oftentimes, it's not because the system sucks or the vendor is terrible. Oftentimes, it's just that you haven't fully understood or had someone help identify and scrutinize what it can really do. You might only be using a very small portion of it and thinking that you need all of this other technology to help solve your core problems within your organization. But often it takes just doing a little peek under the hood and seeing what you have. If you have a leaky faucet, your first instinct is not to move. You want to try to fix the faucet or replace the gasket, right? You don't necessarily need to say, oh, I got to pick up and find a whole new place to live. So I think that's really important, especially now when we think about there's so many opportunities to work with what you have and just find ways to optimize that even more with the tools that you've already invested a lot of time and money and resources and emotional labor and all of those pieces into. Definitely see if there's opportunities to tap into maybe some features that you weren't aware of, or maybe at the time weren't high priority, but now because of shifts in the market and where things are going, there's an opportunity to kind of bring those things to the surface.
Yeah, and also it can help to, it kind of goes without saying in a way, but it diminishes your spend if you can find that, hey, I have this functionality already in this tool and this tool. So why do I need that tool? How much are we paying for that? You can make some decisions where, your bottom line is ultimately going to be affected, right? Whether it's job board spend or maybe a new tool or maybe what you're paying for AI. Maybe you can afford to pay for AI now because you've eliminated a couple other tools that aren't really servicing you for any, positive means.
Right. Right. And just to add one more point with AI, because I think you've said this, but I'll just say it in a slightly different way, that when it comes to say something like AI and adoption, I know that you've heard it, I've heard it. They're like AI, you see all these stories. We need to implement AI in our business. And I think the natural next question is for what? Why? Like rather than just buying a tool like I do on AppSumo, just or all of the tools, go in with a good strategy, a clear understanding of what it is, what are we trying to solve that we believe AI can help us solve? Because I think you could agree, and I know Aaron and Tim are on here as well, where we've seen where people buy these tools, and they're so quick to implement them, but they don't really have a good understanding of how they want to implement it. And so then it gets kind of a configuration spaghetti, right? And it's not meeting the needs that you sought out to achieve because that strategy hasn't been clearly defined.
Well said.
Yeah. Well, to that end, we do have something to help you with this inventory process. I think Katie is going to put a link to it in the chat, but you'll also, I believe, get a link to it when you get a recording for this webinar. So we have, from Pain and Porch Strategies, we had put together a tech selector scorecard and assessment tool. So you'll have access to this. You can download the template. And it really serves two purposes. Number one, to help you capture the inventory and answer some of those key questions that we called out in the last slide, as well as you start to do this assessment of, all right, what do we have? And maybe what might we need? You'll have this scorecard that has a list of kind of just preset standard boilerplate, I would say, functional requirements for any staffing firm. But if you do this, it'll just help you get clarity on what you need truly based on what you currently have, what the features and functions of your current systems, as well as what future systems might support. But it also can help in your discussions with, say, your technology partner or your solution guide, say when Jeff comes in and you pull him in and we start talking about it and he starts opening up the hood and having these conversations. You'll have this resource to help you in it capturing what you have and then evaluating what you need. Thanks, Katie.
You're
All
welcome.
right, so up to now we've talked about understanding your tech why, having that strategy. Why is it important? What are you trying to achieve? What problems are you trying to solve within your business that technology may or may not help you solve? And then we talked about getting that clear picture of what do I have? What am I working with today? What is my, to some extent, technology graveyard, but also what is my, self-functioning napkin maybe that I've structured. And it happens. It happens to all of us. We bolt on these things either because of a temporary need or because of a feature gap. But now those technologies maybe do support some of those features that weren't available before. And so now it's that time to do that inventory and that scrutiny. So once you've done all of that work and you've talked to Jeff and the Newberry customer success team and they've done this assessment, there is that what's next, right? So you've done the work and now there's some sort of change that's going to be happening within your organization. And so in order to prepare for what's next, there's a couple things that are good best practice and often things that we see kind of go off the rails.
Yeah,
so Jeff,
so
what do you typically see?
it's a good segue. We're talking about tools, but what are the next step is to say, like, what's the heart and soul of the actual tool itself is the data within the tool, right? So that's the one thing I think we're all taking for granted is like, what is our data integrity within each of these systems, and what kind of data collection has been happening behind the scenes for for quite some time, or how are things being collected currently? So do you assume that your data is trustworthy? Is there any reason why you have any kind of faith in your data? And what steps are you going to take to ensure that the data in your system is accurate and good and clean and relevant data that you can use with these great tools? You've unplugged a few things, maybe you've replaced a few things, but what is running? What's the fuel for all these tools, right? Your data. So that's where we come in at Newberry Partners, and we recommend, number one, to run data health checks where essentially you're running an audit at all the different data points within your system, right? So we're going to take a look and see, do we have duplicate data? Do we have contact data where there is missing information? Really just to not even necessarily make decisions, but to, number one, examine the data and then provide that data to you so we can all look at this together and make recommendations, but also listen to you and hear exactly, maybe that data does make sense to you, maybe it doesn't. But from there, we can make some decisions on how do we want to create a cleaner and more integral database within your system, right? Come up with a strategic plan for addressing what health you have in the system, or how to create more of a healthy situation with all the data that you have collected or that you are continuously collecting.
Yeah, and I think that's key because, I mean, we've all heard the notion garbage in, garbage out, right? But especially when we think about these different pieces of technology that often they're not all in one. There are some solutions that are all in one light, right? But there's always going to be a situation where you may need to bolt on or add on additional components to create a full stack of technology that's going to help your organization move forward successfully and efficiently. And in order for those different systems to properly talk to one another, whether it's native or not, the data is the key, right? The data is going to be the thing that is going to make or break your ability for these systems to function in lockstep with one another or not. And I think from an implementation perspective, and I think, Jeff, you could probably agree with this, is that often the data health is the place that can create the biggest bottleneck to progress within a project, because we can make all of the functional design decisions, all of the configuration, we can have it all ready and aligned and supporting your future strategy and vision of your organization. But when we start trying to bring your existing data in and it's a hot mess, that kind of stops the train. And that has to get cleaned up. And that is not a small feat often to get cleaned up.
No, definitely, it's ripping off a huge band-aid to start that process, but it's in your best interest, and also kind of dovetailing with the folks who are behind the wheel, right? Like we're talking about, as good as who are using them. That's really important, right? So we need to make sure that the folks that are manipulating this data and using this data, they're using it in a proper way so that they're following prescribed or the company protocols for different workflows and things like that. We want to make sure or ensure that the reporting is going to be accurate. We want to make sure that the data that is immediately accessible is good data. So once we go through a process of, say, data health checking, and then maybe take some decisions, hard decisions or easier decisions on how we want to clean up the data, then I think it's recommended to apply a data enrichment program where now that we have made decisions on what data we maybe want to extract from the system or things we want to keep, after the fact, we want to make sure that we never have to rip open the wound again and start that reparation, right? We want to pull it off one time, clean our data, and then enrich. And what I mean by enrich is to have an ongoing system with vigilance happening behind the scenes of looking at all the data points. Something as simple as an example of your contact information within like your front office. You may have new LinkedIn profiles or new email addresses or phone numbers. The enrichment process will allow you to capture that data without anyone having to physically data enter those things. And that'll happen behind the scenes over time so that you always have this sort of tacit trust built into your system. You're not having to think about, is this still good? Does this person still exist? Does this company still exist? Are they defunct? Can I reach out to them? The enrichment is giving you that the ability to sleep at night because you know that your data not only was cleaned initially, but now we're also we're bolstering and we're making sure that we're protecting that data over not the immediate, but the long term.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think about me and, well, many, many areas of my home, my garage being one of them, right? I will say that over time, that garage, and I hope I'm not the only one, but even though there's nicely labeled boxes with very specific things in each one, I know even within those boxes, there are so many things that I just no longer need, are no longer relevant to the home that I'm living in today, or even to a certain extent, the amount of homeowner repair responsibility I personally want to take versus having an expert come in and do it. And so I think it's really important with this data enrichment. It's kind of like the data health check is almost like the Marie Kondo of organization. If you're familiar with Marie Kondo, if you've ever watched her whole thing is literally pull out every single piece of clothing, paper, pens, pencils, whatever it is, pull it all out and throw it in a pile in the middle. And then from there, start to weed out all the things that you don't need, that are no longer relevant, maybe that no longer fit, whatever the reason might be, that are just not necessary anymore, but also identifying the things that maybe just aren't correct, right? Back to the bad data. So that's a big effort. I know I've had to do it a few times and I'm exhausted by the end of the effort. But if you can create this intentionality with this data enrichment, it's much more bite-sized chunks than these monumental tasks, right? That you have to take on the regular.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking at it in these little digestible chunks that are easy to metabolize or whatever, you can see, hey, I replaced my toaster oven with an air fryer. So I don't want to bring the
Hmm.
toaster oven with me, right? To throw another analogy out there, right? So once you
Yeah.
can decide what to bring into the new home, then you have a new home and it's great. And it's going to be a nice place to live in. And you feel protected because you've protected your data integrity. And down the road, will you have to go through maybe the similar exercise? Maybe, but I think that's again where the people come into play, where there must be this vigilance. You have to have champions for each of the different tools that you're using. And ideally, everyone's a champion of all of them, which isn't realistic, but you need to have folks who basically are, at the helm of each one of those and making sure that they still do have relevance with your company and your strategy for success.
Yeah, and with that data enrichment strategy, there's both just the ongoing habit of checking it in, but also that's another piece of your technology assessment that you can do, is where and in what ways can the technology maybe make up for bad human practices, right? Are there things that we can do, whether as nudges or field validations or automations, et cetera, that can help ensure that this stays up to date? Also, though, with that, identifying and being very honest and recognizing where human human intervention can potentially impact it, right? So finding that balance between the diligence of the data enrichment, but also, is there something that we could lean on that could help foster better behavioral change, right, with our individuals along the way? I think that's an important call out as well.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
know,
Well
you
said.
Yeah, and you talked about, I know in our prep, you also talked about, which I think is it's a great visual comparative about when you think about the data and liking it to the clothes in your closet, right?
Yeah, so that's another way you can get rid of clutter, right? It's an old methodology where as you get dressed or as you put on something and you hang it back up after you're done wearing it, to turn the hanger the opposite direction. So obviously you have to have all of them in one specific direction to start. And then after you take off like the sweater, I'm going to turn it around. And then in a year's time, take a look at those hangers and see which ones have been turned around. You haven't worn in a year. Maybe that's an area where I can make a decision, right? So I have these visual indicators, something tangible to tell me, that's just not relevant any longer. You might want to get rid of it.
Yeah, because often when we go into these implementations, we're coming from something and going to something else. And often when we do that, it's almost like when you move, when you're moving, there's two schools of thought here. You either pack up everything in your house, bring it to your new house, and then decide which stays and which goes, or you do that before you actually pack it up and move it over. And it's kind of that similar concept. I think often we get into these conversations and with clients where it's like, oh, but I need this field, I need this piece of information, I need this, I need this. And over time, you can, through this data enrichment, put a little bit more scrutiny around it and say, but do you really?
Mhm.
Is this just, we mentioned hoarding at the front. Is this just data hoarding? I need every piece of data from the time our staffing firm existed 20 years ago.
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know.
A
Or
resume
do you
that's
just,
12 years old.
yeah,
Still need to keep
yeah,
that.
or exactly, what's the probability that that data from 10, 15, 20 years ago is still valid? I mean, Katie, you talked about just recently how even within the Newberry database, some of those things, I mean, especially with the speed of change and people and jobs, that can come out, that can become irrelevant very quickly.
Yeah, so even with the email that we sent out for this one, we had a few bounce backs. When people are constantly changing careers and moving so fast in the staffing industry, it can be really difficult to keep up on those email addresses or companies that are associated with them in their database.
Yeah. So if there's both like human strategy, as far as that due diligence with the data enrichment, but also maybe some technology helpers to, to help ensure that that data is as clean as possible. I think about, for example, like in healthcare, you have something like Definitive Healthcare, where they have an ongoing database. They maintain the database of all of the hospitals and their respective contacts. And so then that's one less thing that you necessarily have to manage. It just can feed in to your system and keep it updated on the regular. Again, knowing there's a couple quirks here and there with that, right? No, nothing is 100% perfect, but having that diligence, that intentionality around it, I think is really important. And I think the last piece when it comes to what to prepare for next, getting clear on what data you have, how is it being used? What is its purpose? Like, is it just there for information or is it there to actually inform or drive some subsequent action or behavior, whether it's within your current technology or in one of those bolt-ons that you have, one of those add-ons? And then keeping that good due diligence, being vigilant, not becoming a hoarder with your data and having to go through these massive cleanups on the regular. I think the last piece of it is really through that understanding the processes that you have in place and starting to think about, what your current state habits and handoffs might be. And through that, are there opportunities where we can introduce, say, some sort of data enrichment or good data health practices within that? So that way we're not having to do this continual cleanup on the regular. Any final thoughts, Jeff, from you on that?
No, I think it's well said. I mean, basically, we're not talking about revolutionary ideas, right? These are things that I guarantee everyone's thought about, right? And so we were talking earlier, and we think that it's important just to take a pause in your day to maybe address these things. And maybe this is just a good reminder of like, hey, we're thinking about making some changes, or you might have that shiny AI object, in the back of your mind, right? So it's just good to start thinking about these things. You might have everything you need, but it's really important to, I think, take a pause in your day. We're always going from one thing to the next nonstop. It's really important to really take a break for a minute and keep this in front of mind so that you guys are set up long term and you're thinking about these things, whether or not they're even a need right now or not. I can't answer that for you, but I think it's important to take the time to pause from your day and start thinking about, are we going through this hamster wheel, or do we need maybe to start rethinking of how we are approaching our long-term success?
Yeah. It makes me think I just unfortunately had to replace my entire air conditioning unit in my house. And it was a necessity. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. You need AC. And one of the things that when they replaced it, we were talking to the tech about was this AC, we bought it for the reason that it had a 20-year warranty on it. But there's a caveat. In order for that 20-year warranty to remain valid, you have to continually have maintenance on it at least once a year, or else it voids the warranty. And it makes me think that same type of strategy, these technologies don't have warranties, if you will, often that you're buying, but there is a pseudo warranty on it in that if you're spending all of this time, energy, money, resources on this technology, both for implementation, but then ongoing utilization, don't void your warranty by continuing to execute bad practices. Don't make the system work less efficiently than it could had you built some of these practices and principles into your process going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And communication with your teams. Um, they need to understand the whys and how things operate and what intrinsic or what type of inherent functionalities exist within systems that they aren't tapping into, right? So your people are really important.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And to that end, that was a good setup, Jeff, because we are going to have our December session is going to be all about readying your people for change and how you can create better engagement, participation, adoption, and success through the practices that you can execute with your people as they're navigating this change journey along with you. So that's a great call out, and communication is one of the big keys. All right, so to recap kind of our three key tenets here, our three best practices when it comes to getting your systems change ready, getting your systems optimized for what's next, for where you want to take your organization forward. You know, it's really important to make sure that you map your tech and your system needs and tie them to those strategic goals. Make sure they're aligned, because if they're not, it's very quickly going to go off track. And then along with that, getting that clear picture, understanding the how, the when, the if, the where, and the why for your current technologies and your systems. And then making sure that whatever decision you make going forward, ensuring that the information that is being captured and utilized in those systems is clean and clear and consistent. So that way, either with your big implementation that you're doing where you're moving from one house to another, one ATS to another, or if maybe you're adding on or optimizing the systems that you have today, that you have smoother data mapping, data communication, and that data integration, so that way things don't go off the rails real quick. Any other final thoughts, Jeff, here?
No, I think that basically that summation is perfect. We don't want to beat you over the head too much more with this. I think you guys are understanding, are picking up what we're putting down. Again, I don't think it's necessarily like revolutionary, crazy ideas. I'm sure you've had these thoughts top of mind as you joined the webinar for a reason. Uh, these things have been swimming around, right, for quite some time. So it's really just a matter of us talking it through. And I think ultimately, if you do have a need for any of an overhaul, or you want to go through this whole process, that's where we definitely can assist in that regard. So definitely don't hesitate to reach out to us for any of your
Yeah,
needs.
absolutely. Absolutely. And to requote the great sensei, Tim Jackson, it's not complicated. It's just freaking hard. It takes intentionality, it takes focus, it takes attention and intention in order to make it happen. But once you do, it will ensure that your systems are operating at their optimal level and that your people feel supported and empowered to do the things that they are best at through the help of the technology that can help get there. So I think that's the key, is that, don't void your warranty, don't void all the hard work and money that you've spent and time that you've put into optimizing your systems through bad practices, but also making sure that anything that you do is setting yourself and your organization up for success. And so on that note, as Jeff mentioned, please, as you start to get started with this, know that all of us are here to help support you. Myself, from the change readiness perspective of things, if you download that software assessment scorecard and you have questions or need any help with it, please don't hesitate to reach out. And then, of course, the customer success team at Newberry are there to really serve as your partner and your advisor as you begin to embark on this next stage of your technology optimization, whether it's buying or finding out how to tap into what you have today and make the most of what's available within your stack currently. And so on that note, we do have our contact information here. If you do want to reach out, please don't hesitate to do so. But most importantly, we have 2 more of these webinars in our Change Readiness series that we would love to have you join us and be a part of. They're going to be really fun conversations. The next one is really going to touch on the value and the importance of having well-documented and streamlined processes. So that way you're not creating your own self-functioning napkin, right? The processes themselves, the handoffs, the value streams, those are aligned with your organizational strategy. And then the last piece, which is the linchpin of all of your change efforts and your ability to be successful, is empowering your people so that they can effectively move through change. We have a QR code there that you can scan to sign up for our upcoming webinars, and we definitely hope to see you at a future one. But before we go, we wanted to open it up and see if anybody had any questions for any of us. You can put them in the chat, or I think, Katie, is this a webinar? Yes. So you can put them in the chat and we can answer them, or you're more than welcome to reach out to either of us if you have questions as well. But if you do have a question, we would love for you to post it in the chat. And we'll hang out for a few more minutes here if you think of something afterwards.
Perfect timing. I just finished my coffee.
Fantastic. You know what? I mean, Jeff, we have a few minutes. If you have a tambourine and you want to do a little tiny desk performance, we can, make it happen.
My son stole my bass. I used to
Oh,
play bass in a band moons ago, and he played guitar for a while, and then he decided that he wanted to move to bass. Very intelligent of him, because everyone plays guitar, Dad, and there's not a lot of bass players, and everyone needs a bass player. So I said, okay, I like the way you're thinking.
very practical mind there.
Yep. So he's in the
All right,
middle
well,
of. Sorry, go ahead.
that's awesome. No, that's fantastic. I love it. That's a very smart way to approach it. Like, find where they're right, even from staffing strategy, find where there's a gap, find where there's low participation, or not a lot of people are serving that market or performing that role, or, playing that instrument, right, to some extent, and fill that gap, and you'll never not have work.
Yeah, and you can play the funk.
Oh, and you can play the funk. Yes.
Well, it looks like we're getting lots of love. Everybody loved it. Great
Oh,
job, Jeff.
good.
So if we want to
Yeah,
wrap
thank you.
up again, and then if anybody needs to reach out, feel free. We're always here for you guys. So with that, everybody have a great day.
Thank you all. Thanks, Amy.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Katie. All right, you guys, take care. Have a great day.